Everybody. Welcome to video number 3, Enhancing Students' Word Knowledge, a focus on word parts and cognates. I'm Dr. Lisa Leckie from Georgia Southern University. Before we get started with the actual content of this video, let me take just a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about myself so you have some degree of faith in the content that I'll be sharing today. So before moving here to Georgia, I taught middle grades, ELA, Spanish language arts, reading, social studies, and ESOL for 18 years. I worked in a dual language program and had new immigrant students to completely bilingual students that I was able to work with. I also have my national board certification in English as a new language, focusing on early adolescence and young adulthood. My role here at Georgia Southern is diverse. One of my roles is being Associate Professor of English Learner Education, and I also co-direct our master's degree program in ESOL and teaching culturally and linguistically diverse students. I have to say that when I first moved here to Georgia, working with ELs in Georgia was different than working with ELs on the border state of Arizona. The language was different, the context was different, and I really needed to spend some time learning about my new community. I'm forever grateful to educators in Savannah, Chatham, Effingham, and Macomb-Bibb counties for letting me work with them, work with their students, and learn more about the constraints and possibilities of working with English learners or multilingual learners here in Georgia. All right, so the content for today, I will spend a little bit of time talking about the importance of word knowledge and different ways we can approach that. This particular presentation has two kind of strands. One, we'll talk about word parts. How can we focus on all of those smaller pieces, smaller units in words to help students develop their metalinguistic awareness? And then also really taking advantage of the language skills that students bring with them to the classroom. Our students are multilingual learners. They come to us knowing some language. So how can we capitalize on their language knowledge to help them be more successful in school? And then finally, I'm going to give you some thoughts and ideas about differentiated vocabulary lists, particularly for your more emergent English learners. So let's get started. Before we begin, I want to remind everybody about the varied proficiency levels of English learners that you have in your classroom. One English learner is very different from an English learner sitting right next to them. This diagram was taken from the new 2020 WIDA guidance documents. You can see that down at the very point of the triangle are entering and emerging ELs. Sometimes we refer to those as newcomers, but are those students that have really limited English skills. Now, although they might have really limited English skills, many of those students come to us with large degrees of knowledge and language and literacy in their home language. Some of those students come to us with limited literacy in their home language. And what makes it even more challenging for us at the middle and secondary level is we have a lot more text, a lot more abstract topics, and a lot fewer visual supports that we tend to embed. We're reading chapter books and novels. We're not reading picture books. So we have fewer cues that those students can use to really develop language. A lot of this talk will focus on those students. However, it's really important not to forget those students that are progressing and developing their language ability. We have the job to help students broaden their English language vocabulary as well as deepen their English language vocabulary. And so I'll also point out some strategies and structures that will be helpful and supportive for students with more English language proficiency. And I want to say that the majority of what you're going to hear today are strategies and structures that you can incorporate into your general education classroom. If you're an ESOL teacher and you have the ability to pull students out for small group instruction, these will work fabulously. If you are a middle or high school English teacher and you have ELs intermixed with native English speaking students and students of all races and abilities, these are strategies and structures that will be helpful for all students, and I'll give you some ideas about how that can play out in your classroom. And I also want to draw your attention to WIDA's new terminology and their new document. We are really trying to move away from the term English learner and instead focusing on the term multilingual learners. Because as I mentioned, your students come to you with language knowledge. So they know a language. We just have to find ways to leverage their language knowledge to help them become academically and socially proficient so that they are successful here in the United States and Georgia specifically. And the term multilingual learner also takes into account the wide variety of experiences that students come into our classrooms with. Some of them have been here for a long time. We call them those long-term ELs that we just can't seem to get them to pass that access test. Some of this vocabulary work will be really helpful for students to develop that vocabulary, particularly when I get to the academic word list and some activities there. We have students who have very limited formal education experiences. We have our refugee students, students that come from very small communities in Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala with limited opportunities for literacy in their home language. So we have to find ways to augment and support language learning for those students as well. All right, not sure what happened there. There we go. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of word knowledge. Now, I'm speaking to an audience of English teachers, so I know we know this, but I want to frame it in terms of working with students who are learning English as an additional language. One, we have those varying English proficiency levels in your classroom. So trying to find strategies and structures that help you differentiate your instruction using that same structure. We don't have time to do lots of separate things for individual students. That's just the reality. We have lots of students that come through our classrooms every day. We also really want to focus, like I said, on the depth and breadth of vocabulary learning. We are uniquely positioned in an English language arts classroom because we get to read about whatever we want to read about. Right, we can read topics, nonfiction topics, fiction topics on a wide variety of from a wide variety of time periods and contexts and situations, which is great because it really gives us the opportunity to develop that foundational, that breadth of language knowledge. But we need to make sure that we are supporting, particularly our emergent and entering ELs, with some strategies and structures to learn that foundational knowledge. Thinking about words like butterfly and table and chair that most of your students are going to know because they've been around in an English speaking environment for many years. But our newer immigrant students are not going to have those words. So how can we use the text in our English language arts classroom to really focus and build that foundational English knowledge? And then, of course, we really want to support students' general academic vocabulary. Our colleagues in science and social studies and math really have a specialized set of vocabulary terms that they are going to help our students learn. We have the ability to really develop students' general academic knowledge with words that are commonly used across all disciplines. And I have some techniques for you to use later on to do that. All right. So, if some of you happen to have ever been elementary school teachers or have colleagues or friends that are, you might have heard of programs called Word Study or Words Their Way. They really take a look at having students compare and contrast word features and categorize and sort words to develop their metalinguistic knowledge. We don't often see them utilized in middle and high school classrooms for a couple of reasons. One, I think they're mistakenly thought of as techniques and strategies for students who are learning to read and learning to spell. And while that's originally how they were intended, I do think there's some validity for our students in the middle and high school level. One, those word sorts really do help develop their inductive reasoning skills. We have the ability of and the privilege of working with adolescent learners whose brains are more cognitively developed than their younger elementary school counterparts. They can really think critically about language. Their brains are ready to find those patterns and those structures in English to really start to describe the whys and the hows of the English language. So we'll take this one example, one sort for an example. So if you look at the words there, you will see that we have people who do things and then we have words to compare. all of the words here on all four of those lists either end with an ER, an OR, an AR. Yes, that's all of it. So first, give this list of words to your students and have them put them into categories. Like, how would they categorize and classify these words? What patterns do they see? And then what happens if you give them the next two categories? Can you sort them into two separate categories? One, people who do things, and two, words to compare. See if they can make those two sorts. And then can they further break down the people who do things category into the other, the word endings? And then can they explain the why? Do they notice any patterns? Why does one use an OR instead of an ER? What are they noticing about the spelling patterns of those words? For your emergent ELs, yes, they will be able to see the patterns in the words. But imagine if you had some quick pictures that you were able to put next to the driver, the farmer, the jogger, the writer, and able to help them develop that foundational knowledge of jogging, riding, swimming, some of those verbs that are there too. So taking advantage of that. This sort here and the sort we're going to take a look at on the next page is from a publication called Word Sorts for Syllables and Affix Spellers, and those authors are listed there for you. That's a great one to use with older learners. I am sure if you take a look at your elementary school classrooms, reach out to your colleagues there, or even ask your principal to purchase a copy for you. It is relatively inexpensive. The sorts are all there. They're written like this, so it gives you some ideas what to do with the sort, and then it gives you the categories for the sorts, but also are the black line masters where you're able to print out the sort, cut them out so students can actually physically manipulate those words. So those resources are done for you. Let's take a look at this sort. So that previous sort was really kind of content. There was some, ending work, right? But really thinking about people who do things and comparative adjectives there. This sort is related to sounds. And English is one of those amazing languages where we have lots of different letter combinations that make the same sounds. So, really helping students identify those patterns, sort them into categories, and explaining the why. Like, what is the rule? What does the word relax? That really is a K sound, okay, when it comes to the end of the word. And what is the pattern for words that have a K sound at the end of the word? So, really helping students think about language, think about sound symbol correlations, and again, just have an opportunity to develop some foundational vocabulary skills. So, what does this look like when we're working with older students, right? We do not have the opportunity to work with our students all day long. Maybe we have them for an hour time period each day. I would suggest that using these as a bell ringer or a warm up, your daily oral language, just once a week. Do a sort once a week as a warm up with your students is another way to augment their language understanding. Have some sorts really done and ready to go to use as a sponge activity when you just have those random weird days where you have 15 minutes at the end of class where your activity ran short. These are also really good. Sorts are great to use for those of you that are fortunate enough to have block schedules when you have those extended class times. It's a great way to break up an ELA classroom, which tends to be pretty sedentary. We do a lot of reading and writing, which means students are sitting still. In the middle of a block schedule, putting a sort out there and having students take a break, have a conversation with a partner or a small group, notice some language patterns and categories will not do anything to water down content or time for your more advanced students. It will actually provide them the opportunity to verbalize what they already know and understand about the patterns and structures of the English language. There are great virtual options to do this. You can open up a Jamboard, give students the printed list without even cutting it, and have them put words on Post-it notes and move it around to Jamboard so that they can figure out what the categories are and how those words are spelled and what those words mean and why we're putting them together in a category. It's also great, instead of giving students the headings, because they are more cognitively advanced, have them figure out what the heading of that category would be. Why did you put all of these words together? What pattern are you seeing? And again, the power of this is the partner and small group work, because you're getting students to talk about language and to talk about patterns and noticing the smaller parts of words that impact meaning and impact spelling. All right. Oops, sorry. Building on that same concept, I want to take a minute to talk about Coxheed's academic word list. Avril Coxheed used a computer and analyzed all kinds of high school and college textbooks, from math, from science, chemistry, biology, anatomy, physiology, physics, all the realms of science, all of the realms of social studies, from economics to world history to geography, and English language arts as well. But used a computer to help develop a list of words that are the most commonly used words across all of the disciplines. Sublist 1, this first sublist has the most commonly used words in American school system, from grade 6 through college, right? What's even better about this list is not only do we get the word, but we get all of the related words. And notice that the only thing that changes about most of these words as you look at the list is the suffix at the end. Because as English teachers, we know it's the suffix at the end that changes the function of a word in a sentence more often than not. It's a suffix at the end that will change a word from a noun into a verb, or from a noun into an adjective. So let's take a look at a quick example of what I mean. Okay, I'll give you a second let me get this out of the way for you. All of these words are taken from that first word list with analyze as the head word. So the analytical analyst analyzed the analysis of the other analytical analyst. Notice that the suffix endings are what change the meaning of the words, and also give you ideas and clues about what part of speech that word is. Again, what a great opportunity for a warm up, daily oral grammar, getting your class started off while they're coming in and taking attendance, to really have students, one, identify all of the words that begin with ANALY and identify their part of speech. Another activity you could do related to this is to have students rewrite this sentence without using any of the words that start with ANALY, to see if they understand the meaning and the nuances of those words. Again, helping students develop their metalinguistic skills, their understanding of word knowledge, and augmenting their vocabulary. Being able to look at word parts in the context of an ELA classroom with an English teacher who can help them give language to what they're noticing about those word patterns will set them up for success in their other content areas where they are encountering these large content heavy words. They'll have some word attack skills that have been informed by you, the expert. All right, switching tracks slightly to focus on cognates, or words that have the same linguistic origin. So the English language is primarily informed by Germanic and Romance languages. So languages such as Dutch, German, Swedish, and Norwegian have many English language cognates because we all share that same Germanic linguistic lineage. Languages such as French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian are Romance languages, are also heavily influence the English language. Now, while here in Georgia, we don't get many immigrants from Germany, Sweden, or Norway, we do get quite a few from Spanish-speaking countries, from Portuguese-speaking countries, and from French-speaking countries. I think we often forget many of our refugees, particularly refugees coming to us from Africa, coming to us from Haiti. They are exposed to French in various forms in their home country. So that while English might not be their home language, and they might have an additional indigenous or tribal language, many of them will understand French. And so, how can we harness what students already know and understand about their own language to help them translate to English? So, we're going to do a little cognate search here. Okay. I'm going to give you a minute to take a look and read. Let me see if I can get that up there a little bit better. This selection, this is a translated version or paragraph from Crime and Punishment, a novel that students typically have some exposure to in high school. So I'm going to give you a few minutes just to take a look at this document. Don't try to read for comprehension. That's not the point of this exercise. I want you to find words that are in this document that look a lot like words that you know in English. Okay? So just make a quick list or identify mentally words that you recognize because you know English. They're very similar to words in English. Okay, great. And again, not reading for comprehension, just identifying words that look familiar to you. Here are the ones that I've highlighted, like acostumbrado is accustomed, deficiencias, deficient, causado, caused, ciudad, city, sorpresa, surprise, and you can go through and notice, oh yeah, those words really do look like words that I know in English. Now, there are many of your students that might recognize a word or might not recognize a word as being a cognate, like preponderancia, preponderance. I mean, there are many of our English speaking strong students that won't be able to identify or define the word preponderance for us. Crime and Punishment is a challenging text for all students. So just because we translate it into Spanish is not going to guarantee comprehension for students, but we can help them utilize and build on the language knowledge that they bring to this text. So if I have a student, a 10th grade student, we're working with Crime and Punishment, and he or she is at that bottom point of that triangle at that entering or emerging level, big discussions, comprehension of Crime and Punishment is really not going to be helpful or effective in helping them develop their English language proficiency. Now, if I need them to be able to explain the story of Crime and Punishment, to really talk about character change and plot, there are a couple of things I can do there. Of course, I can make use of translated versions and audio support, but again, recognizing that that's a challenging book for all students. But two, how can I incorporate visual support? Can I use graphics like Storyboard That or cartoon strips or graphic novel versions to really facilitate that? And don't worry, a later video will be focused all about how we make these grade level complex texts accessible to those students. So more to come on that. But for this, imagine if as I'm working with my students and they're reading and we're writing about Crime and Punishment, what if I give my entering emerging EL a highlighter and I let them go through and find words that they know, right? That they can identify as cognates, things that look familiar to them. That's going to do two things. One, it's going to give them some word attack skills when they see those words again later. Two, it's going to let them know that I might be exhausted and tired and feeling overwhelmed about how much English they don't know, to really give them that confidence and support and help them identify words that they do know. Okay. And I have a great cognate list for you in Spanish as an additional resource that I'll describe here in a little bit. All right. So just for fun, let's do this one more time, but let's take a look at the same excerpt, but in Portuguese. Okay. All right. Just because you've already done that once. Here are the highlighted words, the cognates that I identified. Notice, um, if you go back and look at this presentation again, that here in the Portuguese version, I have this word, figura. I'm sure that's not how I pronounce it in Portuguese. And I don't even want to try to pronounce that, but it's meticulous. And you'll see in this next section that it's fastidiousness. And the Portuguese translation is really a synonym. There was a close synonym for me. So now, even though it doesn't match letter for letter, the meaning is connected to a word that I know in English. It's going to help me understand what that new word fastidious is. So here's the original English excerpt, just for those of you in case you wanted to read through to get a sense of what you were reading in Spanish and Portuguese. While you're reading, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the power of cognates and how to support students in identifying cognates. One, students won't automatically do it, right? We think, oh my gosh, that word looks just like a word that I know in English if I'm reading the Portuguese or the Spanish. We're adult learners. We have developed some more executive functioning. We've grown up. We're better educated. We're college graduates. We have more skills. Our middle and high school students are going to look at that text and say, I don't know it all. I don't know anything. And so, if we intentionally give them opportunities to identify cognates, that will help make that a patterned and learned skill for them. Okay, it won't happen automatically. We need to be intentional about giving them opportunities to do that. When I'm working with students at that emergent level, it would be much more beneficial for me to test them on words and assess their vocabulary on those cognates, right? And then I have another way for us to take a look at the other words. How do we develop that foundational level literacy? So let's talk about that. As I mentioned, now that we're in middle or high school, we're reading chapter books. We don't minimal pictures. We have to provide that context. And even though we have chapter books that are leveled and simpler and easier to read than others, they still lack visual support. And when we are talking about those emergent ELs, right, we need to think about vocabulary a little bit differently. So I'm going to share some excerpts and some thoughts about a book titled George Washington Socks. As you can see, it's about George Washington. It's work that I did with a teacher who had brand new immigrants, one from Haiti and one from Honduras. And she's like, look at this vocabulary, right? It is not the vocabulary that they need to know. Now, if I have multilingual learners who are at that level 3, 4, and 5, this vocabulary starts to become much more relevant and meaningful, right? That it makes a lot more sense because we really want to deepen their vocabulary. But for students that are at the bottom point of that triangle, I need to find opportunities to broaden their vocabulary. Because if I don't have that breadth of vocabulary knowledge, future texts are going to be inaccessible. I need to learn words that I'm going to encounter more often than daft or faux. I need to learn English words that I'm going to see on a regular basis. So when I'm reading other texts, I can comprehend those texts. So I want to talk a little bit about thematic vocabulary lists. And because we're working with middle and high school students, we get to utilize their skill set as well. They can be more independent than many of our elementary school students can be. So in working with this teacher, I read through George Washington Socks and realized that there are lots of words that these students, one, will encounter over and over in this text, George Washington Socks, but also words that will be helpful to them in their social studies class if they understand and know those words, particularly words related to the Revolutionary War. While some of our immigrant students might come from a country experiencing a revolution, they probably haven't learned about the American Revolution. Why would they? It's not a part of their history. The words associated with the American Revolution will be a part of the students' learning until they graduate from high school. So it's important for us to make sure they know and understand these words, right? So words related to the Revolutionary War, words related to war in general, again, because they appeared over and over in the book and because they will be useful for students continuing in other content areas. And then there was lots of opportunity for words associated with weather and landforms. So this is just the first section of the book, but it continues and we added to that weather and landforms list throughout. One, helpful in science, but two, they might see these words and phrases again in another text. And then just some general vocabulary words that were over and over again that we thought would be helpful for them to learn. So we simply work together to figure out what are these categories of words that students will see in this text that have future utility that we can focus their learning on. We made a list, we made a table, and we had these two students work together. So while other students in the classroom were working in small groups and partners on their vocabulary lesson that comes directly with that book itself, that first list I saw on the previous slide, these two students were working on their own list. And what they did is they went to Google Images, typed in the English word, found a picture, and then used Google Translate to translate it. The top one is in Spanish and the bottom one is in French. So this is a great way, one, to help students become independent in their vocabulary learning. So helping students practice the skill. This is the English word I need to know. It's helpful for me to have a picture, and what a great way, and I can use Google Translate to help me get a definition, either a synonym or a longer definition. Those two boys did this independently after we took the time to create that first list, right? You don't need to do all of this work for students. You do want to check it, right? You want to make sure that their pictures actually match the vocabulary word because, Google's not perfect. But look at what else I get to learn as a teacher. I get to look at their translations and go, oh my goodness, the words for river in Spanish and French are pretty close to our English word. I can help them make that connection. Not so much for shore and the weather. But when we get to war, right? The French word for war is combat. I'm sure it's pronounced differently, but wow, what a great connection to make. And look at the similarity in the word for army and for soldier and for musket. Okay. And again, now I, as their English teacher, know that these cognates exist. So I can remind them and help them make those connections with the cognates. We don't expect you, as their ELA teacher, to know cognates from all different kinds of languages. But our adolescent students can do some of that work for us, and it helps us develop our own language understandings. All right, so let's go back to our slideshow and wrap it up. So, thinking about those thematic lists, here's a strategy. As the ELA teacher, when you're reading through whatever chunk of text that you're going to use to provide your vocabulary list for, read through that and figure out what are those foundational themes? Like, what are lots of common words happening in this text that I can make a separate vocabulary list for my emergent ELs? So thinking back to Crime and Punishment, those first two chapters of Crime and Punishment do lots of description about two things. One, about what the city looks like, and two, about what the interior of the house looks like. So developing lists of words with street light, street, alley, house, I think they use the word garret in there, and parts of the house, from the bed to the table to the chairs to the carpet, right? Those are words that our newer immigrant students need to learn in English. And we, as teachers of English language arts, through the text that we use, have a rich opportunity to help them acquire that vocabulary. So in addition to this video, there are 5 resources for you that you'll have access to. One is a research study. Both of these are light research studies about the importance of academic word knowledge for middle school students and older, right? Some great research, some great ways to think about academic word knowledge. The second study is the focuses on word study, those word sort activities with adult English learners, and how beneficial it was for them to engage in these word sorts and the conversations about those word sorts that we typically assign to elementary age students. So think about how you can incorporate those sorts in your middle school and high school classrooms. They're really powerful tools. You have included a great list of English Spanish cognates. You have the academic word list that has all of those word families, all those different variations of analyze, for example, all the way through. And then you have the academic word list that just lists all of the top words that occur most often in our academic texts. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you.